Great. And I will let our people in. Morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We're going to be starting pretty soon. Thank you so much for joining our kickoff Lunch and Learn series with Logan Herring out of Wilmington, Delaware. I'm sure he'll make me make that up later. We were just talking about Baltimore is where he went to school. And so we're just going to give people just a few more minutes to log on and to join us. And we just hope to be an informal conversation about the incredible work that he's built in the city. So we'll get started in moments. Awesome. So my name is Lillian Singh, and I'm the CEO and founder of Enterprise Adventures of Color. I am so excited to just bring another voice, primarily for the Flint, Michigan ecosystem, where the inaugural cohort of EVC has been funded, and we've been partnering with nonprofits across the city over the last year or so to support their power building strategies, their organizational capacity building, their fundraising strategies, et cetera. And when I thought about one of the things that I wanted to add to this program design was how do nonprofits learn from other nonprofits who are doing incredible work across other cities and having access to those types of nonprofits. And I thought about, the first voice I wanted to bring to this conversation, who would that be? And for me, the one and only Mr. Logan Herring, who I have both a professional relationship with, as he is an advisor for EVC, but also a personal relationship with. I call him, my younger brother by a couple of years, but also someone that I personally respect because of the way that he's been avenging for residents and family members and community members across the city in which he comes from. In moments, I want to share a little bit about his accolades and, how, and the things he's accomplished. And I think that's important. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about like what he's done, right? Like what he's done in the city of Wilmington, Delaware. Reach Riverside is the area you're going to learn a little bit more about and why he's done it. And that's the whole point of our call. We're going to spend about 40 minutes just in dialogue, and then we're going to open the floor open to questions. As an advisor for EVC, I promise if there's follow-up questions that you have in the future that we don't get into during this conversation, I'm pretty sure I can get access to Logan. So Logan, as I've mentioned, is a native woman. Logan, what do they call you guys? In Flint, they call them
Wilmingtonian,
Flintstonian.
Wilmingtonian, Delawarean.
Wilmingtonian, Delawarean. Okay, there you go. Awesome. Native from that city. So he's of and from the community in which he's been avenging in, for his entire career. He's the grandchild of the late Reverend Otis Herring, who was a community leader and philanthropist. He, as many of us, graduated from college and was like, hey, let's go back home. Let's go back and see what we can do there. And he started a nonprofit organization where he was focused on mentoring student athletes. And he served in that capacity for 10 years. And after that, what he decided to do, he wasn't finished serving. So he decided to take over the executive leadership role as executive director of Kingswood Community Center in 2016. 2 years later, and that's where I met Logan in 2018, he became the CEO of Reach Riverside. And what we're going to be talking about today is the work that he's been able to accomplish over very short 6 years. We were just talking about what are our goals for the top of this year as we think about, too much is given, much is required. And we know that to be very true. So super excited to have Logan join us today. So Logan, first question for you as we hop right into the dialogue and conversation. What's the heartbeat behind who you are? I know people can Google you, we can go on LinkedIn, we can track you on social, but who are you, right? Why do you show up in the way that you do?
Yeah, so, well, Lillian, first, thank you for having me today. And it's a pleasure to be here and to be able to share a little bit about my story and the work that we're doing in Riverside. To answer your question, I'm actually going to answer with something I believe you told me a long time ago, which is my experience is my expertise. And so my life experiences really created who I am today and why I do what I do. I grew up in a single mother household. You heard, if you're on the call, Lillian talk about my grandfather, who was a huge community leader, probably the biggest community leader in our city and our state back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s. He's the first person to endorse Joe Biden's political career. And I found out recently that he was doing pretty much everything I was doing and even set it up similar to how we set it up, which we'll talk about later. But he did housing, affordable housing, community centers, daycare centers, the whole nine. In addition to that, my mother is very community focused. She worked at DuPont, which is, the big corporate leader here for many decades here in Wilmington. And then she retired and went to be a behavior interventionist in the school system for 14 years. So it's kind of ingrained in me and my DNA. But, growing up in a rough neighborhood, but having exposure to Montessori schools and public schools and private and Catholic schools and a liberal arts college really allowed me a diverse set of experiences that I've been able to use to navigate this tricky and convoluted world of nonprofit space. So that's just a brief summary on why and who I am.
On your why. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
that. And, a big part, right, of the work that, we've done together, Logan, since, our time together, which started in 2018 when you were a part of Building High Impact Nonprofits of Color, which is what, EVC, Enterprise and Ventures of Color, is modeled after, is focused on personal leadership and personal identity. Because what we know is if you are able to truly have confidence in who you are as a leader, so much more follows, right? So, and we can just talk about, just that for, a moment, what personal leadership values guide, how you drive impact professionally.
Yeah, so it's interesting because pretty much all of my personal leadership values we have adopted as our organizational core values. And so I'll talk about, let's say, three of them right now. One is remember when you prayed for what you have today. And so back when Lillian, you and I met, like if I would have prayed that we would have the amount of success, the amount of growth, the amount of accomplishments in the beginning of 2024, I could have never imagined this, right? And so how do we, within ourselves, look at the work that we've done? And although it definitely is not enough, we can say, man, if I thought back to in 2018 and 2024 that we have done all of what we're doing now, I would have been ecstatic, right? But when you're in the moment, you feel like there's so much more to do that you don't just sit and celebrate. And so one of the things we do whenever we get a grant or any type of funding, we have bells in our offices. And when we're in the office, we ring the bell. And because we're pretty much hybrid these days, we'll even send it up in like the subject of our emails, like ring the bell. We got another 50,000 or 500,000 or 50 million, whatever the case is. And just that's just something to celebrate the successes, knowing that we got a lot more work to do. The second one is when, not if. And that's something that my mom would not allow me to say in our household is the word if. And so that is a core value that in our organization, you will never hear anyone say if. If they do, they typically correct it themselves or someone else will correct them. And that just speaks to the power in the tongue and, you know, when we are going to get that grant or when we are going to build this housing. So it doesn't give you that backdoor escape or excuse like, well, if, no, it's never if, it's always when. And then the last one I want to touch on is community first. And that really comes down to decision making. A lot of times we are at this fork in a road and should we do this or should we do that? And bottom line, it comes down to what's best for the community. And so I would say those are kind of my three leadership values that, again, we've adopted as core values within our organization.
And we were talking about, you know, what's energizing us right now, right in this moment. We are at the 9th day of 2024. One of my business partners said to me yesterday that this is a leap year. I was like, what do you mean? She was like, February has 29 days, it's a leap year. So like Logan, before we get into, you know, you really introducing your organization, you know, what are you leaping towards or energizing you around? What's energizing you personally, right? Like as a human, right? Because you are Logan Herring, right? But then you are also CEO of, you know, 3 organizations, which we're going to talk about. But as a human, like what's energizing you as a person right now?
Well, I am a newlywed as of July of last year. I have 2 sons. And so personally, what's energizing me is that what I want for my family and my kids, I want for every family and every kid in the Riverside neighborhood. And frankly, Wilmington, Delaware, and United States, especially if they look like us, right? And so I understand what it takes to have a successful family. I understand what resources you need access to, whether it be quality education, quality housing, retirement, 401k. And so these are the things that I think about with every family that I have the privilege to interact with within the community. And so that's what energizes me because I know how much work and how much is needed to give my kids and my family the best chance of success in life. And I want to do the same for every single family that we interact with.
Thank you for that. So tell us more, Logan. You are, you know, the awards you've received is 40 under 40 from Delaware. I track you on LinkedIn. You be hanging out with Joe Biden and doing all the amazing things. But tell us more about the organization, you know, that you lead, that, you know, many that you founded, you know, in Wilmington, Delaware, Riverside area. So let's start with that. Like, how are you avenging in the Riverside area of Wilmington for families right now? What does your work look like?
Yeah, so the work in Riverside started back in 2016. I started at Kingswood Community Center February 1st, 2016. So I'm coming up on my 8-year anniversary. And I was assigned to coming to an organization that was essentially about to go out of business. It was in the red. My predecessor had stolen money from the organization, really run it into the ground. The building was falling apart. And so just to give context, Kingswood Community Center It's a 17,000 square foot facility the organization has been in existence since 1946. It's the first integrated community center in the state of Delaware. And we sit on 12 acres of land, Kingswood does. And we sit in the Riverside neighborhood, which is historically the poorest financially neighborhood in the city of Wilmington. And so when you have an organization that's really been the heartbeat of a community for so long on life support, it was tough coming into that organization and trying to reinstill trust with the employees, with with the staff, with the stakeholders, especially since they had missed payroll in 2015. Like, it was a really bleak outlook, and took about 2 years to stabilize Kingswood. And then we had this, I don't know, crazy idea to start two new organizations. One, the Warehouse, which is a state-of-the-art teen center, and then Reach Riverside, which is implementing the purpose-built communities model of holistic revitalization. And so since we had stabilized Kingswood, and Kingswood has an early learning academy, a senior center, so we were able to leverage the resources that we had at Kingswood in terms of a building, staff, renewed relationships with funders in the community. We were able to really base the birth of Reach Riverside and the Warehouse out of the foundation of Kingswood. And since I was the leader of Kingswood, it made sense for me just to be the leader of these other two startups, Reach and the Warehouse. And essentially that was the beginning of what we now call the work group, the Warehouse, Reach Riverside, and Kingswood Community Center. So we went from an organization in Kingswood that really didn't have a dollar to speak of to now three organizations leading a $600 million community revitalization with in aggregate about $11-12 million budget, over 200 employees, 75 of which are about full-time and 200 part-time, and over $60 million in assets.
Got it. So the question is this, Logan, how did you use your superpower, right? I mean, to be clear, I heard you. When you started in 2016, you guys were in the red.
Yeah.
One organization. 8 years, you've been able to, raise over $240 million, right? In the last 4 years for this revitalization effort. Just tell us, those who are listening, what do you think are the two ingredients, right, that you had to learn in a turnaround of an organization to get to this place? Like, what are just two things, right, that you felt like has been most critical to this transformation?
Yeah, not necessarily in this order, but do what you say you're going to do, because too often people don't, and dream big. And so when you combine those two, that's really tough, right? I remember when I was initially hired by, and I was talking to the board chair, and this was probably towards the end of 2015. He was like, if you can do half of what Dave Cisco, Dave. Dave was the head of a foundation here, and Dave was the one that brought me on. Initially, I was on the Kingswood board, and that only lasted a couple of months. I think I was coerced because, unbeknownst to me, they asked me to step in to be the interim ED in February. But he was like, if you can do half of what Dave Cisco says you can do, then we're going to be all right. And so when I say do what you say you're going to do, like, we dreamed big, right? And it didn't start huge, but dreaming big is like, all right, we're going to get rid of the exposed asbestos in the floor and the ceilings. We're going to have HVAC. We're not going to have a leaky roof. We are going to forgive all of the debts that were owed by parents and increase our standards of early learning, so they actually believe they have something to pay for it. If they can't pay for it, we're going to figure out a way to work with them. Like, just little, and then building momentum and allowing it to snowball, to have bigger dreams and saying, well, we can accomplish this, and we can start another organization. We can start another organization, and we can build 300 houses. No, now we're going to build 700 houses. We're going to go from a $100 million project to a $600 million project. And so sky's the limits, but really just, like I said, speaking things into existence and going by that core value of when, not if.
So as you know already, I am, as a leader and launching EVC, really unapologetic about, naming the gaps that nonprofit leaders of color face explicitly, because they are systemic in nature. And if they're systemic in nature, we can redesign solutions to actually equalize the playing field. And those gaps, as you are clearly aware of from working with me, is the capacity building gap, the leadership gap, and the funding gap. So as you've been able, to address and do this turnaround, let us know, right? Like, what was the largest capacity building gap you had to solve for, right? And what tools or consultants were most useful to you? Being able to name, like, this is the real gap we're facing, whether it was systemic by nature, racially motivated and driven, whatever that gap was. Can you share with us, what was that gap? And how did you actually overcome that gap?
Yeah, so I have to say, and this just isn't because you're on the screen, but the work that we did with building high impact nonprofits of color really opened my eyes to understanding that the gap isn't personal in nature, meaning that it's not what I am or am not capable of, but it's what I have or don't have access to. And for me, the biggest gap was capital, but not financial capital, social capital. Because if you have social capital, you can get financial capital. And I think people typically see it in the reverse order. Like, I need money, I need money, I need money. No, you need access to the people who have access to the money, right? And so one thing that I have been bullish on is making sure that our brand recognition touches as many people as possible. And so whether that's a personal relationship I might have, or making sure that our logo is seen everywhere, or making sure that people tour so they can understand the work that we're doing. And so when I step into the room and I'm asking for the money, it's really not whether you're going to give me the money or not. It's about how many commas are going to be in the check when you write it.
I really appreciate that, because I think that leads to the next question that I have. And I think you've touched on this a little bit, is really around the leadership gap. What we know is executives of color, such as yourself, disproportionately face pay inequities, glass ceilings, controlling board members. But I know all your board members are amazing. That hinder, your leadership trajectory, right? We know that to be, some challenges that a lot of nonprofit leaders of color face in particular. What is one challenge you had to navigate, right, in your leadership? And can you share with us how you actually navigated that challenge to get to the other side for a solution for yourself and your organizations?
Yeah, the biggest challenge that I've seen with nonprofits is they call themselves nonprofits. And so, I despise that term. I like to use the term tax exempt business. And the reason why I say that that's the biggest challenge, because people see nonprofits as businesses that should do more with less. And truth of the matter is, we're asked to do a lot more, and we could do so much more if we had more. But we have to operate as a business. And so understanding that we need to generate a profit, right? And we can reinvest that profit. But to do things on a shoestring budget really is disrespectful to the communities that we're looking to serve. And so as we operate as a business within the work group, that allows us to have a bigger impact, to eventually, what my goal is, and I think we might talk about this later, is to put myself out of business, right? Like, I believe nonprofits are created to fill a gap, as we continue to talk about. But are we supposed to be a crutch forever? Are people supposed to need to rely on our services forever? I don't believe so. And it doesn't mean we can't stay in existence as an organization, but why are we serving the same community for 100 years and think that's success, right? And so I would say that our biggest challenge is that we have to begin to look at these businesses as such. And when you approach them as such, then you're able to make more sound decisions like maybe this person shouldn't be within this organization because they're not good, right? Or I'm going to pay this person X amount of dollars because I need them to deliver. And so that's how we've been able to approach it. And also understanding, and this is, you and I have had many conversations, right? If you want somebody good, if you want a good product, you got to pay for it. And the return on that investment will be tenfold. And so I don't make any bones about, how much I make or how much my colleagues make. I'm very, very um, adamant about that because I want what's best for the community. And you can't hire somebody and pay them pennies and expect them to deliver what we want them to deliver.
Appreciate that. Yeah, because we've definitely had some conversations, particularly around pay equity. I've experienced that in my own career, and sometimes it's felt bad. But one of the things that I'm proud of with the EVC cohort is, we have 2 success stories, right, of leaders understanding the value of their leadership, the value of their contribution to the Flint ecosystem, and demanding to be paid for it, right? And so we'll unpack that later. But I know that a lot of folks probably off this call going to be like, "How did you do that? And how did you
Now
not?"
hit me up, please. Send me an email. Let's talk. I love that's
Yeah,
one of
I
my
mean
favorite
that's
topics.
real talk, right? So something for us to know that is a real challenge, right? Particularly for nonprofit leaders of color.
Mhm.
And you talked about this earlier, our last gap, right, that I want to, engage is the funding gap. You talked about social capital. I think one of the things that I've realized is, throughout my career is funders fund people.
Right.
Oftentimes, but a lot of leaders that look like us don't have access to the power brokers. And if we do, we don't have transformational relationships with them. We're oftentimes looked at as like that service provider over there. And, these like really ridiculous, like benchmarks for success for like half the amount of money that it actually costs to deliver and produce. So like, give us like a nugget, like how do you, use your personal capital to increase your social capital to raise the amount of capital that you need, right, to do the work. And then I want you to just talk a little bit about what is the work? Like you've been at this for 6 years. What have you actually accomplished? And we know that capital has been an incredible component of that accomplishment.
Yeah, so the biggest thing I could say is to be present, right? Like when I say I am everywhere, or at least I make it seem like that. And so even the use of social media, right? Like every time you go to an event, or have an event, take pictures and post it. And so I get all the time, like, you are everywhere. No, I'm not. I just take pictures and post it. Because what that does is it creates a profile, and that profile creates excitement. And then, as my colleague Dave Ford always says, it's good to be sought after, right? So people think, well, he's got social capital, he's influential, we need to have him on our board, we need to have him come be a keynote, and it just continues to self-perpetuate itself. And so that's it's more of a art instead of a science. But it has been working for me and my organization for quite some time now. So I don't see stopping. Like you just said, like I see you hanging out with Joe Biden. You think I wasn't going to get a picture with Joe Biden if I go to the White House and then not post it? Like, come on now.
Of
So,
course you were.
of course, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. So talk to us a little bit about what you built, and then we're going to go to the last set of questions and open the floor to questions. So for those who are joining us today, begin to drop your questions into the Q&A box, and I'm going to sort through them, and we're going to get into dialogue with Logan. So, the Rework Group, what is it? What have you accomplished from 2016 to now? What exactly is the work? Like, what have you actually built, designed, created? I know you've talked about the warehouse, but what's the other 2 groups, right? Kingswood Community Center But the development work, I think, is what people are really super excited about. So we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so let me go from one to the next, right? So Kingswood, 17,000 square foot facility, has our early learning academy, a senior center, sits on 12 acres of land. The warehouse, state-of-the-art teen center, a 43,000 square foot facility that was a former charter school, two charter schools that both failed, that was given to us by Capital One. And we put about $4 million in renovations into a building that was built in 2000, so practically brand new. It was designed for teens by teens. What does that mean? We hire teens to create the architecture, the interior design, the furniture, the programmatic design. And we pay 9 teens year round to help us run this facility. We employ about 200 teens per year. So when I mentioned those part-time employees, we were talking about those teens. And so when I talk about that, they go 12 weeks where we pay them for workforce training. And that's 8 weeks of soft skills, 4 weeks of internship, externship, and they typically leave with some type of certification, accreditation. Then when we get to Reach Riverside, it's about 600 homes, mixed income housing, that actually 700 homes that we'll be building. We've already built 141. And we just received a $50 million federal grant last year that will help us accelerate towards those 700 homes. One thing that people always ask us, are we gentrifying? And I say yes. Surprisingly, I say that because we are gentrifying without displacement. And typically gentrification involves displacement, which is why it is a term that people don't like. But just to give you an example, out of the 141 homes we've already built, 125 are occupied by people that literally moved across the street. So we've been able to avoid displacement because we had 8 acres of vacant land that we can begin building the homes on. And as we build, we move people over, then we begin to demolish. But those homes are now vacated because people moved across the street. So all in all, and I forgot about last but not least, Kingswood Community Center. We're building a new Kingswood. So it's going to be about an 80,000 square foot facility, $50 million or plus build, which will allow us to double the size of our early learning academy. And in the last 2 years, our early learning academy, with over a 95% low income population, is 100% kindergarten ready. And so we are currently converting our early learning academy to a Montessori academy in the next 2 years. And we had the highest paid teaching staff in early learning in the entire state of Delaware. So I probably missed some stuff, but hopefully we'll get to that when people ask their questions.
Awesome. Well, our last set of questions, in me launching and designing and building EVC, to your point about earlier on, what were your personal values, right? That lean itself into your professional realm. For me, there's 3. And so the action-based principles for enterprise adventures of color include courageous and transformational leadership, which means, there's an expectation that leaders, tax-exempt business leaders, lead with courage and practice open integrity, both publicly and privately. There's an expectation that you build collective power, which really requires an understanding that you can't dismantle systems of oppression by yourself. And in order to do that, one of the things I know that you practice and, is the Thanksgiving model, right? There's no ego, there's no space for that. There's always room at the table if you want to lean in and collaborate. And then the last one is, paying it forward, right? Is how do you as a leader create bridges and pathways and access for other tax-exempt businesses, right, who need, the services, resources, assets that you have, and how do you be intentional about that, right? Because at the end of the day, the whole ambition and the goal is to reinvent and recreate new vibrant communities, right, for the families that you guys are all collectively serving. So those are my principles, right, for EVC, but those are also my life principles, right, how I live my life and practice professionally. So can you talk about, of these 3 principles, what do you think has been the most propelling for you in your career and why?
Yeah, so this is an impossible question to answer. So I'm going to start with the first one and say leadership is the number one thing, leadership or transformational leadership rather. But it encompasses the other two. But you have to start with leadership because you kind of alluded to this, but and one of my old business partners said this to me a long time ago, and it stuck with me. People don't invest in the business; they invest in the business leader, right? And so I understand that the position I hold has a lot of responsibility, a lot of expectation, and I have to set the example for building the collective power and paying it forward. And so, I sit on like 12 different boards. When we build collective power, we touched on a little bit, but the secret sauce to the work group is the fact that it's three organizations that operate as one. And so Reach Riverside is the managing partner of the three entities, and the warehouse in Kingswood are the service partners. And for Reach to provide that leadership, they pay a portion of Reach's budget, or the warehouse in Kingswood pay a portion of Reach's budget. And so what it allows us to do is go out and acquire and retain the best talent around, compete with the private sector, and really get the best return on the investment. And so the other thing that it allows us to do is to fundraise excessively and exceedingly more than other organizations because we can go to the same funder 3 times if we wanted to, right? And a lot of times the funders have the provision, well, if we give to you this year, we can't give to you for another 3 years. We never had that problem. And we share the same leadership. And so you don't have to pay for 3 CEOs, salary. You only pay for one. And so it's just really the sharing of the resources. But that sets the example of the collective power, right? And so then we extend ourselves to other partner organizations and say, look, this is what we've learned. This is how we do it together. How can you come be a part of this? And you made the mention of the Thanksgiving Day model, which is, something that I learned, unfortunately, through some of the lessons I had with running my first nonprofit, Delaware Elite, which is that we can't do everything by ourselves. And so what we ask is everyone to bring their best dish to the table. And like my Thanksgiving, we'll have plenty of leftovers at the end. And it's an abundance theory versus a scarcity mentality. And if we look at this work and not being a zero-sum game, we'll be better off for all of us. And so everything doesn't have to be a competition, right? Because at the end of the day, I think what the pandemic has really taught us is that we're more connected than we like to believe. And so if the tide in Riverside rises, then all boats in Delaware rise. And so, that's just how we approach it. But it starts with leadership and setting that example. And I'm happy to set it.
Great. Thank you, Logan. So questions from the floor. The first question is, Logan, what is the greatest failure you've made professionally?
Yeah, so I just touched on it, but I'll dive a little bit deeper into it. And so Delaware Elite was my first nonprofit. Started it at the age of 23 with my best friend and my brother. It was a mentoring program for student athletes. And what we did, we used basketball as like the carrot to bring them in and teach them life skills. And so in order to play for us, in order to travel to, the best tournaments and stay in the best hotels and go to the best restaurants, you had to do what you had to do in school, at home, SAT prep, community service. And for that, we only paid $300 for an entire season. A lot of times we had to discount that and subsidize it for our participating student athletes. But what I realized, a few years into, about 5 years in, was that we could not do this all by ourselves, which we tried to do, right? And it was a costly failures in a number of different ways, but I would say the most costly is one of our student athletes suffered a home invasion, and him and his mother were shot, and his mother died in his arms. And when I got to the hospital, they were like, Coach Logan, he only wants to talk to you. So at this point, I'm like 27, 28 years old. Trauma-informed care wasn't a topic that was being thrown around back then. And it was at that moment where I'm like, we weren't doing enough, right? We thought we were doing it, but we weren't. And then a year later, his best friend was shot and murdered in Wilmington. And eventually he had to move out of Delaware in order to see any hope for his future. So he moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. I was like, that's a failure, because if you have to move out of the zip code, the city, the state that you were born in order to see promising future, we did that. We did that as a community. We did that as a society. And so when I had the opportunity to come to the Riverside neighborhood, to start things like the warehouse, I understand intimately because the young man's house is in the neighborhood where I'm now doing the work. And so the Thanksgiving Day model is because of that failure, because now instead of saying, well, we're going to do this all by ourselves, I'm saying, look, pull up a seat. If you got a dish, I don't care if you're just bringing the soda, right? We got to drink something. And definitely have used that to approach this work from here on out.
Yeah. A follow-up question to that, Logan, thank you for that, is so, as an organization, what activities, should you hold, right? Or let me ask it this way. How do you know what activities you should hold, right, as an organization versus what you should outsource to partners? Like, what thought processes, what, strategies, how do you come to that decision? Because you guys are the big boys, right? Like, in
Yeah.
Riverside, like, you guys are 3 organizations, right? So it's great that you have that model, but how do you make that decision?
Yeah, so I would say that, well, let's go to our flagship programs, right? I can give it to you this way. So we have flagship programs. We have our Early Learning Academy. We have Empower, which is our economic mobility program that Lillian helped us to build, that is now fully funded through the year of 2031 because of the federal grant we just received. We have RISE, which is our workforce training program at the warehouse. And then we have Restore. And all of these are acronyms. I'm an acronymologist, is what my colleague Kenyatta calls me. And so the ELA is the Early Learning Academy. Empower stands for Economic Mobility, places ownership within everyone's reach. RISE is reaching and investing in youth for sustainable employment. And then Restore is real estate strategy to obtain racial equity. And so those are like our pillar programs. But to give you an example, like Empower is all about economic mobility, right? And so we have these navigational coaches that help families navigate all of the convoluted and complicated social service systems and whatever they need help with. So if financial literacy is something that our families need help with, we're not going to say, all right, well, let's build this financial literacy program. We're going to partner with an organization like Stand By Me, which focuses on that, or many of the financial organizations that exist in Wilmington, and we'll partner with them. So really understanding that, in any of our work, we're not really providing that direct service outside of the Early Learning Academy. Even with RISE, right? We partner with a number of different organizations around workforce training, or employment partners around workforce training, to give them those opportunities and employment experiences. So it's really about seeing where there's a gap and understanding, look, we're not trying to create a program to fill that gap if there's something that already exists. And so if it already exists and we think that they can provide a quality program or fill that gap, we're going to lean on them to do it. And a lot of times we'll financially compensate them for that if we have the means to do so.
Can you talk to us about, another question is, what steps do you see between where you are now in Wilmington and seeing this type of model investment develop and scale nationally? I know you sit on a couple of national boards. I saw you hanging out with Harlem Children's Zone. You was there hanging out with Byron. So of course, right? Like, maybe you was there.
Yeah.
You were in DC that time. I just couldn't see you.
Yeah.
But like, talk to us about, like, this is great. This is a great investment. So excited that, folks in Delaware is investing in this work. What pathways, what energy do you see about, this happening nationally, and what associations or anchor institutions you're partnering with that allows you to excel?
Yeah, so we have a few different national partners. You mentioned the Harlem Children's Zone, which is also responsible for the William Julius Wilson Institute, which was created kind of as a subsidiary to Harlem Children's Zone to help organizations achieve what the Harlem Children's Zone has achieved in New York. We are also a member of the Purpose Built Communities Network, where there are 25 network members that are doing a similar approach to community revitalization using the model of high quality mixed income housing, cradle to career, college and career pipeline, community wellness, and economic vitality. So there's 25 of us around the country. We are also funded by a national funder and Blue Meridian Partners, who has relationships with both Purpose Built and Harlem Children's Zone, which is helpful as well. And then the federal grant through Choice Neighborhood Implementation through HUD also provides us an opportunity to be on that national level. And so for us, when we talk about scale, right, it's what do we do that we believe that we can, that is replicable, but also scalable. We know the warehouse is a very unique model in terms of engaging teens and youth and young adults. And so that's something that we constantly are exploring how we might replicate that in other cities in the state or, around the country because we're being asked to do so. We also look at our structure, right? We have Reach as the managing partner and then Kingswood and the warehouse as service partners, and how the shared services agreement really allows us to extend the dollars that are entrusted with us, so much further. So we're looking at that as well as a model to be adopted by other organizations around the country. So a number of different ways that we're looking to scale our organization. We haven't pinpointed anything yet, but I would say the number one thing that I'm really focused on that's a part of that work is generating earned revenue. Although we've been very successful in raising philanthropic support, as a business, I don't say business owner, right? But as a business leader, I've recognized the importance of diversifying revenue and monetizing our intellectual capital. And so that's something that I'm really focusing on for 2024 because I don't want to be dependent on philanthropy. I don't want to be dependent on government, especially with the way, this election season is looking. I think that, being a good business leader is making sure that you're resilient to any outside changes that could affect your business, like a pandemic, so to speak.
Got it. And as we round out, I have just two more questions for you, Logan. Earlier, we spoke about the leadership gap and the funding gap. Are there any other or capacity gaps that were key pivotal in the development and expansion of the WeWork Group that you had to address? That you've said Dave Ford's name like twice in the call, maybe because I know him, we're mutual friends, but can you, as these leaders are thinking about these are real gaps, but these are some other gaps that you had to pay attention to as a leader. Can you speak to that and what system you used to transform?
Yeah, so I'm very, very fortunate. I can just look at my leadership team, we call our C-suite, right? And so I'm the visionary. I'm the guy who comes up with all the big ideas and the acronyms that sound cool. But when it comes to the day-to-day work, I'm not really involved. And I think my colleagues are happy that I'm not involved. One, and I'm happy that I'm not involved. When you are a small organization and you're just starting up or you're trying to scale, you have to have a hand in everything. And so, I can be a generalist, that's cool. But I think that, what's most impactful is for me to, and Dave says this all the time, is like, do what only you can do. And so that goes back to the Thanksgiving Day model. We don't just operate from an organizational level, but on an individual level, we do that as well. So Dave was the finance guru, right? He's the one that looks at our early learning academy back in 2016 and said, all right, we're making $6,000 in revenue monthly at our early learning academy. Now we're making like $150,000 a month in revenue from our early learning academy. And we understood that that was a business line that we could increase to generate sustainability around the entire organization. So we did that. Kenyatta came in 2018 who is our chief operating officer, and she put the policies and procedures and the people in place to continue to build on the success. And then Laura Mood, who is now our CFO, which Dave was the CFO. Now Dave focuses on community investment like real estate ventures and things like that. Laura was the accountant that blew the whistle on my predecessor, and is decided to get off the sideline running her own accounting business, being a traveling CFO, to just be our CFO. And so these three individuals help lead the day-to-day work, and they all fill those capacity gaps, which are needed to have a highly successful organization. And then me, as Dave calls me, I'm outside sales, right? I'm the person that really isn't in the building on a day-to-day basis. I'm the one building the brand awareness, the social capital, getting people excited about the vision, and then making sure we have the resources to bring the vision to fruition. And we work so well together as a team because we allow ourselves to do what only we can do. And then, we cross over into each other's swim lanes when necessary just to keep each other honest. But that's the biggest thing. And then I will also say fundraising. In 2019, we interviewed 8 fundraising consultants from around the country. We decided to go with the Curtis Group out of Norfolk, Virginia. And they came to Wilmington, put together a feasibility study, and said in 2019 that we could raise about $20 million in 5 years. They said a stretch goal would be like 25 million in 5 years. And in 4 years, we raised over $240 million. And so I think we're one of their success stories, so to speak. But it really has been amazing to be a part of this work with such great people that believe in what we're doing, but are highly capable in achieving what the vision is as well.
Thank you for that, Logan. And as we close, I would like to thank, the folks who are supporting EVC and the amazing fellows, cohort organizations who, all of them were not able to join today, Logan, but we're going to, schedule a special separate session in the future. But I wanted to personally thank the Flint Corona's Task Force on Racial Inequities, and it's a collection of 4 funders in Flint who decided that what they wanted to do was to really support nonprofit leaders of color, increase their leadership development, support their capacity building, and to support their fundraising efforts. So they contracted with EVC to do that work. And those 4 funders include the Community Foundation of Greater Flint, C.S. Mott Foundation, Ruth Mott Foundation, and United Way of Genesee County. And I'm grateful and thankful for them for believing in, a model, right? A lot of our leaders have demonstrated incredible gains in their own personal leadership, in their own organizational capacity building, and in their own fundraising development efforts. And one of the questions I'm going to ask them in a couple of months when they graduate, because I know you remember our graduation in Wilmington, we were at the Westin. Is, as I close out with you, as you think about where you are, my slightly younger brother, and so many years ahead of you, right? You're choosing to do the work that you do in the community in which you're from, in the community in which your grandfather toiled and your mother worked and your family lived. What would you want your eulogy to say about you? This is the one thing. It's just like, it's a big moment, right? For me, we started it, what's energizing you in this moment, but if tomorrow was the last day, right? What do you want? What are you striving towards to ensure that's a part of your eulogy?
Yeah, I think I touched on this earlier, but I would say something to the fact that Logan was selfless enough to work to put himself out of business. Like, I'm not doing this for a paycheck. I do this because I want better for my community. And as an organization who is charged with filling gaps, right? I want the community in the very near future to be self-sustainable. And, Kingswood, like I said, we provide significant subsidies for our programming. Why can't Kingswood be a model where people have to pay for its services because the community can afford to do so? And so that's what I want my eulogy to say. And that's what I'm working towards. And I also wanted to comment on how you were closing it, and also the work that we did way back when, is that often, I would say, talk about what you taught me, which is what I said earlier. I have my lived experience is my expertise. And I tell people all the time, like, this is not to offend anyone that doesn't look like us, right? But I have the complexion to make the connection. And I don't think anyone, a white man, a white woman, could do the work at this level that I'm doing it. Not that they're not as smart as me, they wouldn't work as hard, right? But for my ability to come from this community, to look like how I look, to be able to go talk to a resident, but also talk to a corporate CEO in the very same day, has really allowed the authenticity to shine through in our organization. And as the leader of this organization, to look like, to come from the people where we're doing this work makes all the difference in the world. And if you look at, I know it's like this in Wilmington, and I'm sure it's like this around most of the country, the leaders of our nonprofits typically don't look like the communities where they work. And that goes back to financially where we need to get, is that we can't afford to work in the nonprofit sector. It's the reason why you don't have a lot of us as teachers, especially Black men. We can't afford to be a teacher, right? It's too expensive, meaning you don't pay us enough. And so it's easier for people who are wealthy to be philanthropists, to give to charity. And so why can't we do both things at the same time and get a greater impact out of making sure that happens? And so I don't plan on going anywhere because I think we're approaching it in that vein. But I challenge everybody on this call and everybody we come in contact with to really push, raise the bar, because we deserve better as leaders, and our communities deserve better for having us as their leaders.
Thank you, Logan.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Our inaugural Lunch and Learn speaker for EVC, of course, also our EVC advisor. We've been rocking together, learning from each other, challenging each other, keeping each other honest for several years now. I don't see that changing. So thank you so much for joining. And I want to thank all of our participants. We're going in our next session next month. We're going to have Kat Gogenauer, who is newly appointed Assistant Secretary of Just Communities for the state of Maryland, working in Wes Moore's office to deploy, I want to say about $60 billion, and thinking through how do you get those dollars into the hands of community members that are furthest from justice, and creating pathways for, to make sure that those nonprofit leaders are centered and ready. I will also ask if you could just fill out the feedback survey. If you fill it out, you enter a drawing for $50 Amazon gift card, just for us to kind of like just capture what else, do you want to hear from these type of sessions. We're going to have a series of 5 additional ones after this. They're going to be happening every first Tuesday. Every second Tuesday of the month, And those who have RSVP for today, we will send you all that information for the next speaker. So thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate your time. Thank you for having lunch with us, rapping with us. And Logan, thank you for hanging out.
Thanks for having me. And everybody that's working with Lillian, you got a real one. So make sure you listen to her. I'm happy to call her my big sis.
Awesome. Thank you, Logan.